Here we go, heading into our climax of the story. Chapter 23 is the revelation of the Scarlet Letter. Remember that Dimmesdale is giving his final election sermon, and it says here that this eloquent voice at length came to a pause. There was a momentary silence, profound as what should follow the utterance of oracles. So, as a reader, I'm wondering, does he stop talking for a moment and then shift into a different sort of topic of his sermon, or is he done? It becomes clear that he is done. Then ensued a murmur and half-hushed tumult, as if the auditors, released from the high spell that had transported them into the region of another's mind, were returning into themselves with all their awe and wonder still heavy on them. So they are sort of like coming down from this transporting, experience as they listen to him. In a moment more, the crowd began to gush forth from the doors of the church. So I wrote here that this is confusing because if you remember, people are out in the streets. Pearl is running around, playing amongst all the people in town, and Hester, during this sermon, is standing by the scaffold. So this whole time, as a reader, I'm imagining that he's giving this speech outside. But he's not. He's doing it in the church, which obviously makes sense. He's a minister. It's the election sermon. But obviously people can still hear him. They must have the doors open. People outside must be able to hear. That's all I can gather. It's not like they had microphones, I don't believe, in those days. I mean, maybe like a magnifying, like a bullhorn or something like that. But I don't picture that at all. I picture him speaking with a very, strong voice just to the people. So I just made a note here that the people seem at the end like they're confused, like, is it over? And then to me, it's just confusing because I'm picturing this whole time that he's outside. In the open air, people start talking. They start to, just discuss what happened. According to their united testimony, never had man spoken in so wise, so high, and so holy a spirit as he had spake that day, nor had inspiration ever breathed through mortal lips more evidently than it did through his. Like, he was so genuinely inspiring. Its influence could be seen, as it were, descending upon him. So it's like God is with him as he is speaking and continually lifting him out of the written discourse that lay before him. So it's like the presence of God as he is giving his sermon makes him a stronger speaker and seems to sort of lift him above everybody else. We never do hear what he actually says, but here it does tell us what his sermon was about. It says that the subject had been the relation between the deity and the communities of mankind, with a special reference to New England. And as he came near the close, he said that a spirit of prophecy had come upon him. So he had like a premonition. He also had like a word of God. That's kind of what I think of. A prophecy is like a word of God, but it can also be like a sense of some truth. So he understands here that God is telling him and everybody that their New England colony is a blessed place. It says here, his purpose as mightily as the old prophets of Israel were constrained only with this difference, that whereas the Jewish seers had denounced judgments and ruin on their country, it was his mission, Dimmesdale's mission, to foretell a high and glorious destiny for the newly gathered people of the Lord. But through it all, and through the whole discourse, there had been a certain deep, sad undertone of pathos, which could not be interpreted otherwise than as the natural regret as one who was soon to pass away. Yes, their minister, whom they so loved, and who so loved them, that he could not depart heavenward without a sigh, had the foreboding of untimely death upon him, and would soon leave them in their tears. So I have a bunch of notes here. First of all, he is comparing the people of New England to the Jews initially when they were in Israel. And he's saying that in this instance, God is blessing them and that New England is a blessed place and that they, have like God's guidance and that they should feel connected to God for that reason. But he also, so that would have been one part of the prophecy, is that that God is looking over them. God is leading them in their goals to become a colony. But his other prophecy is that he's going to die. That's the other thing he tells them. I also have a note here about like this sadness. This is like the third or fourth time that Hawthorne has told us that at the same time that Dimmesdale is preaching and seems so possessed by the Spirit, there's also this undertone of sadness. And I just made a note like, yeah, we know why. Why does he keep repeating this? And so keep in mind that when you're annotating, you should be having a conversation with the book. There should be natural reactions here. And one of the things that I think is challenging about Hawthorne is that he does tend to go on and on and on with some of these ideas. But I mean, I think we should ask why that might be. And I would suggest that perhaps it's because this is a universal truth, that all people live their lives with moments of joy and moments of regret, and that every person has within them an undercurrent of sadness, just from mistakes they've made, losses that they've experienced, just regret in general, sadness in general. That's just the human condition. That's how it is for everybody. And Dimmesdale obviously is no different. So that was just something I thought was worth considering, that anytime you see repetition like that, you should ask yourself, like, what's the point? Why? Why are we repeating this again? This idea of his transitory stay on earth gave the last emphasis to the effect which the preacher had produced. It was as if an angel, in his passage to the skies, had shaken his bright wings over the people for an instant, at once a shadow and a splendor, and had shed down a shower of golden truths upon them. So because he is about to die, and he believes he's about to die, they see him already like an angel. So, thus there had come to Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale an epoch of life more brilliant and full of triumph than any previous one, or than any which would hereafter be. So in this moment, it's like his best moment ever as a preacher. It's like a culminating, accomplishment for him to speak to his people in this way. He feels deep gratitude, is what I made a note here. He doesn't know what the afterlife has, but he feels like he's done all he can on earth. That's sort of how I would interpret this sense of like, I have lived a full life. I have done what I'm supposed to do. Almost. We know he has something else to do before he dies. It says here, he bowed his head forward on the cushions of the pulpit at the close of his election sermon. I could see a teacher asking that as a quiz question. Meanwhile, Hester Prynne was standing beside the scaffold of the pillory with the scarlet letter still burning on her breast. So she is still outside. Now is heard again the clamor of the music. And so the procession picks up again. Everybody heads to the town hall where there will be a solemn banquet. So it's like more of a serious, meal to usher in the new governor. Once more, therefore, the main venerable and majestic fathers were seen moving through a broad pathway of the people. So all the people who'd been in that initial parade sort of lead the rest of the town back to the marketplace. And everyone is cheering. And we have a tremendous amount of just, similes and metaphors here about how they sound like thunder, they sound like an organ, they sound like the roar of the sea. Never from the soil of New England had gone up such a shout. Never on New England soil had stood the man so honored by his mortal brethren as the preacher. So they're cheering for him, they're cheering for the day. He feels amazing. He feels spectacular. How fared it with him then? Were there not the brilliant particles of a halo in the air about his head? So how's he doing is kind of what we're thinking, because we know physically he's definitely not great. And it does say here, how feeble and pale he looked amid all this triumph. The energy, or say rather the inspiration, which had held him up, now seems to make it has left him a little bit, and he's struggling to walk. The glow, which they had just before beheld, was extinguished like a flame that sinks down hopelessly among the late decaying embers. So this is a simile. I'm marking occasionally examples of figurative language. There are similes all over this book, but here's a good example of one. It seemed hardly the face of a man alive with such a death-like hue. It was hardly a man with life in him that tottered on his path so nervously, yet tottered and did not fall. So he looks like he's not really able to walk, but he keeps on. And so what comes up here is that people keep coming forward to help him. John Wilson, the other minister, comes to help him, and Dimmesdale waves him away. He repels the old man's arm. I mean, John Wilson is older than Dimmesdale, but he can walk better. So he tells him, no, I don't need help. He still walked onward as if the movement could be so described, which rather resembled the wavering effort of an infant, with its mother's arms in view, outstretched to tempt him forward. This kind of reminds me of the fact that people, as they get older, sometimes become younger in their thinking, in their behaviors. This just sort of sounds like that circle of life. And now, almost imperceptible as were the latter steps of his progress, he had come opposite the well-remembered and weather-darkened scaffold. So now he's where Hester's been standing, where long since, with all that dreary lapse of time between, Hester Prynne had encountered the world's ignominious stare. There stood Hester, holding little Pearl by the hand, and there was the scarlet letter on her breast. The minister here made a pause. Although the music still played, and stately and rejoicing march to which the procession moved, it summoned him inward to the festival. But here he made a pause. So I made a mark here. Obviously, he's supposed to keep walking, but he stops. Bellingham, so Governor Bellingham, for the last moment had kept an anxious eye upon him. He comes forward to see if he needs help to walk, and Dimmesdale warns him back. She's like, no. Then he turns to Hester. He stretches forth his arms, and he says, Hester, come hither. Come, my little Pearl. It was a ghastly look with which he regarded them, but there was something at once tender and triumphant. So look at this mix of emotions. He's terrified, he's tender, he's triumphant. This is how probably anybody would feel if they were about to openly confess a sin. The child with the bird-like motion, which was one of her characteristics, flew to him and clasped her arms around his knees. Okay, so now she's being very affectionate. Remember, she wanted to walk with them in the marketplace. She wanted to be seen in public, holding hands, Hester Prynne and Dimmesdale. And here he is, reaching out his arm to them. Hester Prynne, slowly, as if impelled by inevitable fate, which is what it is, and against her strongest will, likewise drew near, but paused before she reached him. Remember, she wants to get on the boat and get away, but at the same time, she knows that might not happen. At this instant, old Roger Chillingworth thrust himself through the crowd, or perhaps so dark, disturbed, and evil was his look, he rose up out of some nether region, that's being an exaggeration, to snatch back his victim from what he sought to do. Be that as it might, the old man rushed forward and caught the minister by the arm, and he says, "Madman, what is your purpose? Wave back that woman. Cast off this child. All will be well. Do not blacken your fame." He's like, don't confess. Because, of course, he is the devil. He wants Dimmesdale for himself. "I can save you," he says. "Would you bring infamy on your sacred profession?" And he says, "Ha, temper, methinks thou art too late. Thy power is not what it was. With God's help, I shall escape thee now." Of course, the irony here is that he's being true to his role as a minister by confessing more than hiding the sin and getting away. He again extended his hand to the woman of the scarlet letter. "Hester Prynne," cried he, so I'm sure people can hear now, with a piercing earnestness, "in the name of him, so terrible and so merciful." Look at the juxtaposition of these words. "Who gives me grace at this last moment to do what, from my own heavy sin and miserable agony, I withheld myself from doing 7 years ago." So God is helping him do this. "Come hither now, entwine thy strength about me." Almost sounds like a tree or like a vine. thy strength, Hester, but let it be guided by the will which God hath granted me. This wretched and wronged old man is opposing it with all his might. So he's saying to Hester, hang on to me so Chillingworth doesn't get me. With all his own might, and the fiends, come, Hester, come, support me up yonder scaffold. So like he's struggling to do this. Chillingworth is holding on to his arm. The crowd is very confused. They're in a tumult, which means like they're confused, they're running around, they're all agitated. That's what I would think of when I see that word. It goes on to say that the men of rank and dignity who stood more immediately around the clergyman were so taken by surprise and so perplexed as to what they saw, unable to receive the explanation which most readily presented itself, or to imagine any other, that they remained silent and inactive spectators of the judgment which Providence seemed about to work, like they have no clue what's about to happen. Doesn't occur to them at all what might be going on between Hester and Dimmesdale. They beheld the minister, leaning on Hester's shoulder and supported by her arm around him, approach the scaffold and ascend its steps, while still the little hand of the sin-born child was clasped in his. So they go up together. Old Roger Chillingworth followed. I'm like, what? Dude, how bold is that? As one intimately connected with the drama of guilt and sorrow, in which they had all been actors and well entitled before to be present at this closing scene. So he literally just, pushes himself in there. Up he goes. He's going to try and get this guy until there's no more point, right? Hast thou sought the whole earth over, said he, looking darkly at the clergyman. There was no one place so secret, no high place nor lowly place where thou couldst have escaped me, save on this very scaffold. So he admits, this is Chillingworth saying this, he admits to Dimmesdale that in all of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the only place where Dimmesdale cannot escape Chillingworth is on this scaffold. And yet Chillingworth is still going up there, probably hoping there's some way he could get him. And the minister says, thanks be to him who hath led me hither. So this again is the merciful God. This is the God who is not terrible, but is guiding him so that he doesn't go to the devil. Yet he trembled and turned to Hester with an expression of doubt and anxiety, not the less evidently betrayed that there was a feeble smile upon his lips. And he says to her, is this not better than what we dreamed of in the forest? Like, isn't it better that I confess and die here than we go away like we had planned? And of course, she doesn't know. She has been owning her sin this whole time. She wants a family with him. And she says, I know not. Better, yea, so we may both die and little Pearl die with us. She thinks that if he dies, she will die too, like their family. And it's true, like, not that they would literally die, but if he dies, then they don't have that family. That's what dies along with him. And Dimmesdale says, for thee and Pearl, be it as God shall order. And God is merciful, not terrible. Let me now do the will which he hath made plain before my sight. For Hester, I am a dying man, so let me make haste to take my shame upon me. He wants to confess before he dies, so that he can stand honestly before God. That's what he wants. So partly supported by Hester, also holding Pearl's hand, he turns to the people, whose great heart was thoroughly appalled, yet overflowing with tearful sympathy. They're like, oh my God, he's going to die right now. What is happening? Knowing that some deep life matter, which, if full of sin, was full of anguish and repentance, was now about to be laid upon them. They're like, okay, we're going to hear it. This is going to be shocking, whatever it is. And he does speak out to everybody with a strong voice again. People of New England, cried he, with a voice that rose over them, solemn and majestic. Ye that have loved me, ye that have deemed me holy, behold me here, the one sinner of the world. At last, I stand upon the spot where 7 years since I should have stood, here with this woman, whose arm, more than the little strength wherewith I have crept hitherward, sustains me at this dreadful moment. Lo, the scarlet letter which Hester wears. Ye have all shuddered at it. Wherever her walk hath been, wherever so miserably burdened she may have hoped to find repose, it hath cast a lurid gleam of awe and horrible repugnance around about her. But there stood one in the midst of you, at whose brand of sin and infamy ye have not shuddered. He's talking about himself. It seemed at this point as if the minister must leave the remainder of his secret undisclosed. But he fought back the bodily weakness, like he could just end it there maybe, right? And still more the faint of heart that was striving for the mastery with him, which is probably Chillingworth. He threw off all assistance and stepped passionately forward a pace before the woman and the children. It was on him, he continued, with a kind of fierceness, so determined was he to speak out the whole. God's eye beheld it. Now, I want you to notice here, he has shifted to the third person. Perhaps this is a way of saying it in a maybe safer way, but he does still say it. And so he's talking about himself here. The angels were forever pointing at it. The devil knew it well and fretted it continually. But he did it cunningly from men, and walked among you with the mien of spirit, mournful because so pure in a sinful world, and sad because he missed his heavenly kindred. So he's talking about how he punished himself by fasting, by cutting himself, by whipping himself, by not sleeping. And, he went about the people as if he was good and, like a true spiritual leader, but he missed them because he wasn't fully with them. Now at this death hour, he stands up before you. He bids you to look again at Hester's scarlet letter. He tells you that with all its mysterious horror, it is but the shadow of what he bears on his own breast. Then he says, behold, behold. With a convulsion motion, he tore away the ministerial band from before his breast, and it was revealed. Now, it never tells us yet what it is, but we can imagine he's been cutting himself there. There is some mark. The gaze of horror-stricken multitude was concentrated on the ghastly miracle, while the minister stood with a flush of triumph in his face, as one who, in the crisis of acutest pain, had won a victory. He has beaten the devil. Then down he sank upon the scaffold. He just collapses. Hester partly raised him and supported his head against her bosom. Old Roger Chillingworth knelt down beside him with a blank, dull countenance, out of which the life seemed to have departed. Thou hast escaped me, he repeated more than once. Thou hast escaped me. So I'm thinking, okay, now here's poor Hester with Pearl and her actual husband up there watching Dimmesdale die. And the minister says, may God forgive thee. Thou too hast deeply sinned. No kidding. That's the biggest sinner right there. He withdrew his dying eyes from the old man and fixed them on Hester and Pearl. And he says, my little Pearl, dear little Pearl, wilt thou kiss me now? Thou wouldst not yonder in the forest, but now thou wilt? And she does. She kisses his lips. A spell was broken. The great scene of grief in which the wild infant bore a part had developed all her sympathies. And as tears fell upon her father's cheek, they were the pledge that she would grow up amid human joy and sorrow, nor forever do battle with the world, but be a woman in it. Towards her mother, too, Pearl's errand as a messenger of anguish was fulfilled. This gives me absolute goosebumps. This is so beautiful. She is no longer like a representation of the sin. She is no longer a wild creature. In this moment, she becomes more fully human. She develops empathy. She will become like a legitimate person. She's not this other thing. Which is what Hester always seemed to think her as, like some spirit or some sort of, representation of nature or something like that. She is absolutely now, she's going to make it. That's kind of how I read this. And she has definitely changed. Hester, said the clergyman, farewell. And Hester says, shall we not meet again? Shall we not spend our immortal life together? Surely we have ransomed one another with all this woe. Like surely with the suffering we have shared, we deserve to be together in heaven. Someday I will be with you again, is what she is saying. And this is what Dimmesdale says. He says, thou lookest far into eternity with those bright dying eyes. Then tell me what thou seest. She's like, please, if you're about to die, tell me. Do you see that we're going to be together? And he says, hush. The law we broke, the sin here awfully revealed, let these alone be in thy thoughts. So don't think about the afterlife. Think about what we did. I fear it may be that when we forgot our God, when we violated our reverence each for the other's soul, it was thenceforth vain to hope that we could meet hereafter in an everlasting and pure reunion. So he's saying when we broke that covenant, like you were married and I had no business, having sex with you and having a child, they forgot what the commandments were, that maybe they don't deserve to be together and that they should accept that as a possibility. They don't know for sure, but they should accept it as a possibility. He's saying, just think on your sin, like keep your feet grounded, in the real world. Don't hope for death and the immortal life. Live an honest life and never forget, the mistakes you've made. God knows, and he is merciful. He hath proved his mercy most of all in my afflictions, by giving me this burning torture to bear upon my breast, by sending yonder dark and terrible old man to keep the torture always at red heat, by bringing me hither to die this death of triumphant ignominy before the people. Had either of these agonies been wanting, I had been lost forever. Praise be his name, his will be done. Farewell. So he's saying all the things that happened to Dimmesdale were God working on him, pushing him to acknowledge what he had done and to die, a sinner, but a sinner who has confessed. So I think I just made a note here that this to me this is another, I keep mentioning universal truths, but these are things that all people wrestle with in their mind, no matter whether you're religious or not. It's just like, what happens after we die? We hope for something better, or we hope for something, perhaps. Doubt is that, we don't know. And just like anything, this could be the end. So there's always this question about what is the role of spiritual life? What does it mean? And Dimmesdale is saying, don't think about it. Just live your life and be a good person, which means to always carry your sin and use it as a teaching tool, use it as a way to become better. The final word came forth with the minister's expiring breath. It's the last thing he says. The multitude, silent then, broke out in a strange, deep voice of awe and wonder, which could not yet as yet find utterance, save in this murmur that rolled so heavily after the departed spirit. So there's just this sound that comes from all the people. So what a tremendous ending to this chapter. I mean, clearly this is the climax of the book. We will find out what happens in the conclusion, what kind of follows this moment. But I think it's important to think about all the symbolism here and all just like the lessons that Hawthorne is including here. The Puritan community was very focused on, they were God-fearing and that you must do certain things to please God. And Dimmesdale seems to be saying, God is good and you can be flawed and still have God in your life. And, you shouldn't expect anything from God. You shouldn't expect to know everything. That, you should just allow the doubt versus hope to sort of exist in your life. And you should try to be a good person and not be no one is perfect. I mean, he said in his speech to all the people that he was the one sinner. Well, of course he is not the one sinner. Probably everybody in that crowd is a sinner in some way or another. Some people wonder if he's not like a Christ figure. If you think about him standing up on the scaffold and dying for his, after confessing his sins, he is not a Christ figure because if you know the story from the Bible, Jesus Christ died for our sins. He was that was his role. But this is definitely Dimmesdale is dying for his own sins. But he is Christ-like in the sense that he leads the people. He's a teacher. He seems like a prophet in some ways. He's deeply honest eventually, and he's a good person. He's a good person all the way through. Even when he was hiding his sin, he was still a good person. So lots to look at here. Plenty of places perhaps to find good quotes for, evidence for what is the theme, what is the overall message, what is Hawthorne saying about religion, what is Hawthorne saying about sin. All those various questions are definitely dealt with in this section of the book.